10 out of 10. Absolute masterpiece. Okay, see you next video. Nah, I'm just kidding. Although I do have a lot of praise for this anime, I don't think giving it a score of perfection right off the bat would be very fitting for my first anime review. I mean, this show isn't without its flaws or anything, but when it's good, it's really good. So let's try this again. Back in 2014, a light novel series by Kana Akatsuki was submitted into the Kyoto Animation Award Program's novel category. This novel told the story, or rather a collection of short stories surrounding the life of a young girl whose job it is to write letters. At the beginning, each chapter told a story completely unrelated to this girl. It simply focused on the events surrounding the life of the client that she was ghostwriting for. So even though the story portrays this girl to be the main character, her past is kept in the dark, with only subtle hints ever nudging at the fact that she was once a soldier. But as you delve deeper and deeper into this story, more and more bits of her past start coming to light, until you're finally engulfed in this emotional and heartfelt journey that is Violet Evergarden's. This novel, named after the girl whose journey we get to experience, would later go on to win the first ever Grand Prize Award from Kyoto Animation, and would then receive a Winter 2018 anime adaptation. But why am I telling you all this? It's because I want you to know the roots of the story. This is a publicly submitted work that was written by someone who isn't from a well-known studio. It's a unique and original story that Kyoto Animation just happened to come across, and to not highlight Kana Akatsuki's amazing work, it just wouldn't be right. It's also cause I want you to know that the way that the anime approaches Violet Evergarden's story is different from the way that it's presented in the novels. Not in terms of the type of content per se, but more so in the chronology. So, rather than starting off the story as Violet being this enigma whose past is slowly revealed to us, we are given Violet's underlying story and motives right from the get-go. Within the first 3 episodes, the plot is set up as a very basic coming-of-age story. We're introduced to a post-war Violet, whose very way of living is dictated by the orders that are given to her by her commanding officer Gilbert. However, Gilbert is assumed to have been KIA in one of the final battles of the war. As she tries to cope in a world without him and his orders, she finds herself contemplating the last 3 words that he said to her, "I love you." But Violet, being this child with a very closed outlook on the world, cannot fathom the meaning of those words or the feelings behind them. In order to learn the meaning of "I love you," she decides to become this ghostwriter, an auto-memories doll if you will, so that she can experience other people's emotions and hopefully learn for herself how to feel them as well. It is also within these first 3 episodes that you're most likely to drop the show. It's because a story of personal growth like this isn't really something new. We've seen it time and time again in one form or the other. But to say that Violet Evergarden is generic just wouldn't be right. The way this anime presents Violet's development is what I was most fond of. Rather than keeping the whole 13-episode series focused solely on Violet's overarching story, they use her encounters with her clients as a way to indirectly show Violet's development. And each encounter presents a whole different and unique short story in itself that is perfectly fit into the short 23-minute runtime of each episode. Of the 13 episodes, 7 covered an experience with a client, and each one turned out to be more impactful than the last. But part of the reason why these episodic encounters were so impactful is because of the time the anime used in its first 3 episodes to build the story. Episode 2 and Episode 3 are anime original content that was used as essentially exposition, so that the only questions you would have relating to the story would be with regards to Violet and nothing else. Although they don't quite serve as a powerful follow-up to the events of Episode 1, they're necessary nonetheless to tell the greater story. But once you leave that main storyline and shift over to these episodic narratives, that's when you truly experience the best that this show has to offer. If I had to represent it in some way, I'd say that Violet Evergarden is an emotional roller coaster, where the number of peaks are far less than the number of lows, to the point where it feels like you're just in a perpetual state of falling, because most episodes will just crush your very being with how emotionally heavy they are. Here, I've even gone ahead and drawn what I think this roller coaster would look like in Microsoft Paint. As you can tell by my spectacular work of art, there's barely any room to catch your breath. I would even argue that the times where it was less eventful were the ones where the episodes were focused exclusively on Violet. I was more excited to see who Violet would meet next and what their story would be, rather than find out more about Violet herself. Not to say that Violet's story is any less captivating or important, I just found it more entertaining to glimpse into the lives of somebody different each episode. It's as if in an attempt to not overwhelm you with Violet's story, they switch the role of the protagonist to someone different and let you see Violet through the eyes of someone else. Most often, it's through the eyes of the client. And each time this happens, there's something to be learned from both Violet's point of view and from the client's. For me, whenever we were given one of these episodic narratives, I found that each one dealt with a different type of love. I know it sounds cheesy, but for an anime to be able to distinguish and differentiate each type of love through subtly animated facial expressions or movements, and through intricately written dialogue, that's something to be commended for. Whether it's familiar love, affectionate love, or enduring love, Violet's exposure to each made watching her growth all the more captivating. After each experience with a client, she'd begin to act less doll-like and more like a person who's capable of feeling what others do. Her interactions become less mundane and more relatable. Which brings me to something that I've said in the past when I reviewed episode 10. Violet Evergarden's portrayal of human interaction is the best that I've seen in any anime. I don't know how else to put it other than that it just feels real. There are countless times where I thought that if I was placed in that same situation, would I be saying the same things as these characters? And to be honest, probably yeah. Not to say I really ever want to experience what half of these people had to go through, but for some of these really emotionally charged stories, they presented them very digestibly. Each client, through their minimal screen time, were crafted so thoroughly and built up so efficiently that by the time the climax of that person's story came, I was already fully invested in it. To put into perspective how I thought it went, Violet Evergarden was able to do in one episode what it took Clannad 40 plus episodes to do. You know how the first season of Clannad was all built up to get you invested in all of the characters? And then once After Story came, every time some shit hit the fan, it felt like someone was shredding your heart with a cheese grater? Well, Violet Evergarden does pretty much just that, but much more effectively and on multiple different occasions. But I think I've gotten my point across about the story and the characters now, and I'm sure the art speaks for itself. But just to clarify, if there was one thing this series deserves a perfect score for, it's this. It's without a doubt the best animated show of the season, and provided what could possibly be the most beautifully animated scene that I've ever witnessed in a TV anime. As for the OSTs, I wouldn't say I'm the best to analyze music or anything, but I'll point out a few things anyway. The first preview for Violet Evergarden came out over a year ago, and it started with a song called Violet Snow by Irayuki. To hear the series finish with that exact same song was an unexpectedly pleasant surprise. That aside, there are also many distinguishable OSTs by American-born composer Evan Call. After listening to his entire work here many times over, I find there to be a lot of parallels to tracks that you'd find in a Pixar or Disney film. But I wouldn't say it's quite on the level of something like the Crunchyroll award-winning Made in Abyss soundtrack. There was also a few pieces that used a typewriter as an accompanying sound effect, which I found to be a nice little touch. Now that that's done, let's get to the question that I'm sure you're all wondering. Did it live up to the hype? I'd like to think that it deserves a spot up there as one of the greats. Is it a perfect absolute masterpiece? Not quite. Still though, I highly encourage you all to embark on this journey with Violet so you too can experience her story of growth and acceptance. It really is a beautiful thing to watch. And with that, I thank you all for watching my review of Violet Evergarden. I hope that I was able to convince at least a few of you to give this show a chance. But anyway, until next time, ciao.